What's up guys, Asian here with another gear video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka DPS gear and other class agnostic things like CPs, attributes, race, food, things like that. The Magicka DPS, you guys probably have remained the most unchanged between Storm and Greymoor. The new Magicka DPS set that was introduced in Kind's Aegis seems to be more of a support set than it is a DPS set, and there really haven't been any new set that are introduced that sort of supplanted anything that Magicka DPS are currently using. Perhaps the biggest change that you're going to see from Magicka DPS is that there is a little bit more flexibility now with your Monster Helm set potentially. There are some Monster Helm sets that were buffed, which actually ended up giving them a little bit of a boost for certain specs for certain scenarios. Generally speaking, though, not much has changed for Magicka DPS in terms of gear. So, like the rest of our gear video, we're just going to be going over sort of class agnostic things. So beyond the gear, we're also going over things like champion points, Mundus stones, attribute distributions, things like that. If you're looking for a class-specific build, so that would be what skills you want to use and rotation, you're going to want to check out the build videos that are going to be linked in the description below. Right now, they are going to be released throughout the rest of May and into June, so you will find the dates below if the build has not already been released on this channel. In addition, if you guys just want to know what sets you can run, I do have a list in the description below of all the sets that I'm going to be talking about in this video, where you can farm them, where you would want to use them in terms of equipment slots, and why you would use them. In addition, once the ESOU University website is up, there will be a link to that as well for a written version of this guide. Let's go ahead and get started here. So much of this has pretty much remained exactly the same between Storm and Greymoor, like I mentioned earlier. There are a couple of must-have sets I do want to talk about for some specific builds, but those are usually going to be just covered in the class-specific build video. For starters, though, we have Zaan, which is still going to be the best Marsh Helm set if you're able to get all 6 seconds of the beam. If you're not able to get all the full 6 seconds of the beam to hit, then you might want to switch to an alternative Marsh Helm set, which we'll be going over in a few minutes here. For our body, we are still running Mother's Sorrow. This is still a very strong set to run. There are obviously some other options here, again, which we'll be going over in a few minutes. Finally, for our front bar set, we are running Siroria still. This is going to be best single target damage if you're able to maintain all these stacks. Generally speaking, if you're able to maintain 5 to 6 stacks on average, it is going to be the best set. It does require you to kind of micromanage your Siroria buff a little bit here, so it does require you to have some experience with the fight and some experience running the set itself, but if you're able to master it, then Siroria on the front bar is going to give you the best single target damage here. And then we are running the Maelstrom's Infernal Staff on the back bar here. You don't have to run the perfect version. The perfect version adds spell penetration, which we don't really need as a Magicka DPS, so you don't have to run the perfect version of the Maelstrom Staff. You can run the non-perfect version instead, which drops from normal Maelstrom rather than veteran Maelstrom. Now, in terms of alternative sets, first let's go ahead and talk about some crafted sets. The first crafted set I'm going to talk about here, we're just going to start from the top and work our way down until we find it, is going to be Law of Julianos. This is a classic crafted set to run. This is a Orsinium set, so you do need to have access to Orsinium if you want to craft this yourself. This does require 6 traits to craft, so you need to know 6 traits in whatever piece it is you want to craft. If you want to craft it yourself, could also just buy it off of somebody, or you can get somebody to craft it for you. There are plenty of guilds and plenty of people out there who are happy to craft this for you if you're able to provide them. Next we have Mechanical Acuity, which is also a 6 trait set that is crafted from the Clockwork City zone. This is pretty decent to carry you over until you're able to farm for your other sets here. Not quite as strong, mainly because the 2-piece doesn't provide you any sort of benefit directly because it's just weapon damage. The 5-piece also, while it is great for burst damage, is pretty much going to even out in terms of sustained damage. So overall, again, a set to hold you over until you're able to farm for your other sets. Finally, we have New Moon Acolyte. which is another crafted set, which is a little bit harder to obtain because it does require you to have 9 traits research in order to craft this set here, but it is going to be one of the strongest crafted sets right now for you. Just keep in mind that if you do decide to run New Moon Acolyte, it does increase the cost of all of your abilities by 5%, and this does also include ultimates. So just be mindful of that. Plus, it also has a line of spell penetration, so you will need to share your CP points around. You basically just take out all the points from spell erosion and put them somewhere else. It's not a lot of points, unlike Stamina DPS, you only really have 10 points in the spell erosion, so not a huge change, but still something you want to take into consideration so you're not over-penetrating at all when you're running New Acolyte. For your Overland sets, there are a couple of good Overland sets to cover here. First one's going to be Spinner's Garments. Generally speaking, you shouldn't have that big of an issue hitting the pen cap in trash fights, but still might want to have Spinner's Garments just in case all of the trash might not necessarily be able to apply all the debuffs on them. So it's always nice to have this as a backup. This is a base game set from Malabal Tor. Another good set to hold on to here for certain classes is going to be Necropotent. So this does require you to have a pet. So Sorks, Necromancers, and Wardens in particular are going to be able to make use of Necropotents here. It just adds just raw max Magicka. So it's going to be a little bit weaker than sets like Doom and Acolyte or even Julianos potentially, but it's an easy set to obtain. It's a base game set from Rivenspire, so again, it's a very good set to hold you over while you are farming for your other better and stronger sets out there. And that pretty much covers it for light Overland sets. Now for light dungeon sets, there are quite a few light dungeon sets that are pretty decent. Going from the top, we're working our way down. The first one is going to be Burning Spellweave. This is a classic old set, very good proc set here for base game users. It comes from City of Ash. You do need to be able to deal damage with flame abilities, so that does include things like Light Attacks or Blockade, for example. So the more flame damage that you have, the higher uptime you should be able to get with Burning Spellweave. But even if you're just running Blockade and double Infernal staves, you should be able to get anywhere between 55 to 60% uptime on Burning Spellweave. So it's still a pretty decent front bar set for people who just have access to the base game. The next set is going to be Scathing Mage. Is actually not that bad if you have access to Imperial City Prison. Pretty much falls under the exact same sort of niche as Burning Spellweave, where it's a proc that carries over to your back bar, so pretty decent. It pulls about the same DPS as Burning Spellweave. The difference with Scathing Mage versus Burning Spellweave, though, is that because it comes from Imperial City Prison, you can actually buy key fragments and just literally buy pieces of Scathing Mage. There is some RNG factor involved in this because you do have to open the chest, and there is obviously RNG involved in that, but you can just straight up buy Scathing Mage rather than having to farm for it like you would need to with Burning Spellweave. So Scathing Mage might be a little bit easier to obtain for those of you guys with big wallets. From there, you do have Zen's Redress, which is typically going to be on a healer, but it can find its way onto some classes, particularly the Magicka DK, as a potential DPS set. And that's just because of Roaring Opportunist, which was introduced in Kind's Aegis. That is going to be put on a healer, which will shift, at the very least, possibly one set onto a DPS. Zen's Redress is probably going to be the best one here. Doesn't necessarily have to be on a Magicka. Magicka are just the best to apply Zen's Redress because they have two single target dot they have two class single target dots, so fits very well with Magickas, but it can fit on any other class as well. So just something to keep in the back of your mind that depending on whether you're running Roaring Opportunist or not, you might want to pick up a set of Zen's Redress, particularly if you're a Magicka Dragon Knight. This comes from Lair of Marshlock, so you have access to that DLC in order to farm for this set. Finally, for our trial sets, there are a couple of trial sets that you're going to want to pick up here. Beyond Siroria. First one's going to be Master Architect. Even though Roaring Opportunist was introduced in Kind's Aegis and is going to, generally speaking, going to be better than Master Architect, it still might be a good idea to hold onto this set just in case your healer is still farming for those good set pieces for Roaring Opportunist, or if you're not getting very good uptimes on Roaring Opportunist, let's say you're just consistently getting 5 seconds instead of the 7 or 8 that you need. But still, Master Architect is a pretty decent set to hold on to. This comes from the Halls of Fabrication trial here. The next set is going to be False God's Devotion. This is a very decent set here to run for sustain as well as for damage. This comes from Sunspire. The perfect version comes from veteran versions of the trial. Doesn't really matter if you're doing hard mode or not. You can completely skip hard mode and still get the perfect version of this set. This adds to max Magicka bonus. The non-perfect version loses the max Magicka bonus on the 5-piece there. Really great for trash fights because of the additional sustain that you get. You can also pair this with New Moon Acolyte if you're running two 5-piece sets here, or to kind of cancel out the additional cost increase from New Moon Acolyte while still getting the 481 spell damage from New Moon Acolyte. That is very niche case, but it's still a good combination to run between False God and New Moon Acolyte. Then Roaring Opportunist, you're generally speaking going to be finding this more on a healer than a DPS, but could potentially make an argument for running this on a DPS if you're able to build yourself to really maximize your heavy attack damage. Not really going to be something that's going to be run on DPS. It's going to be more of a support-oriented set, but still something I want to mention just in case people do want to try to use this as a DPS. Again, you're going to have to build very heavily into heavy attack damage, so your rest of your damage is going to suffer as a result of this, which is why it's going to be put on a support rather than on a DPS. Finally, for Monster Helm sets, let's go ahead and go over the different Monster Helm sets you're going to want to pick up. Grothdarr is a really great AoE Monster Helm set that is a base game set. This comes from Vaults of Madness and is really nice. This has the widest radius and it is centered on you, so it's pretty easy to get really good cleave damage with Grothdarr here. It's definitely a set that's really solid. This is affected by Elfbane as well for the Magicka users, so you can get full uptime on Grothdarr potentially if you proc it off cooldown. Next one's going to be Iceheart. This is decent for the additional damage that you get from the 2-piece, but mainly you're going to be using it for the 1-piece, which is the additional spell crit. Sometimes Monster Helm sets aren't going to be a good fit for any fight, just because of the nature of the fight. Those instances, running 2 different Monster Helm sets, each with 1-piece spell crit, is going to be beneficial, and Iceheart is one of those pieces with spell crit as the 1-piece. So mainly you're going to be using it for the 1-piece bonus, but the damage shield that you get from the 2-piece can be beneficial for progression groups. Next we have Ilambris, which was buffed in Greymoor. You can only proc either the flame or the shock damage meteor shower now, but as a result, they did buff the damage. So it's actually very decent if you're able to get all the ticks of that firestorm or shock storm to hit the boss. So for more mobile bosses, it's going to be a little bit weaker just because bosses can move out of this proc here. Just like Grothdarr, this is also affected by Elfbane for those Magicka users out there, so you can get a 10-second duration on an 8-second cooldown, so you could potentially get full uptime on Ilambris with Elfbane on a Magicka DK. Next is Narayaneth. This was changed, so the 1-piece is now spell damage rather than max health, and they also saw a buff to the proc chance and damage of the Lich Crystal itself. So this is actually pretty strong now. This does have a little bit of cleave as well because it does damage across 4 meters, but it does have a 2-second delay on the explosion, so much like Ilambris, if the boss manages to move out of that crystal AoE, then you're not really going to be making the most out of Narayaneth. So just be mindful of the more mobile bosses for Narayaneth. Narayaneth comes from Crypt of Hearts 2, and I believe Ilambris comes from Crypt of Hearts 1. And then finally, I do want to talk about Slimecraw, which is good for groups where your Minor Berserk uptime is going to be a little bit lackluster. Much like Iceheart, you're mainly going to be using it for the 1-piece spell crit. If your Minor Berserk uptime is less than 40%, then Slimecraw is going to be potentially a good set to run because the additional uptime you get from Minor Berserk is going to outweigh the damage you get from other Monster Helm sets. Just something to keep in mind here. This is another base game set that comes from Wayrest Sewers I. Scoria was changed for the 1-piece, does add spell pen instead of health, but the 2-piece actually wasn't changed too much, so it's still pretty much going to be a very limited use set. It's pretty much only good if you want to run a Monster Helm set and your boss happens to be very mobile. Generally speaking, 2 1-piece crit is going to be stronger than Valkyrie Scoria, so I personally, while I do mention it here, it is not a set I typically recommend running on a Magicka DPS because it is fairly weak compared to some other alternatives. And obviously we have Zaan here for the 1-piece spell crit as well as the 2-piece damage. And then finally, would be remiss to not mention this, but we also do have Maw of the Infernal. If the Daedroth behaves properly, Maw of the Infernal will deal the most damage out of all the base game Monster Helm sets. It comes from Banished Cells II. That being said, it is a pet, and the Daedroth can be stunned, it can be CC'd by boss effects. So if you're not able to get the full effect of Maw here, if the pet AI is not working out for you, if it's getting CC'd, if it's getting stun locked, Maw is not going to be particularly strong. Not to mention, having 8 Daedroths on the field can be a little bit cluttersome and probably will drop frames a little bit just due to the fact that it has to draw 8 Daedroths. So while it does provide very good DPS, there are some downsides of running Maw. I personally am not a fan of it, but for raw single target damage, if it works out, then Maw is the strongest Monster Helm set in the game outside of Zaan. That pretty much covers it for all of our sets. Going next to our character sheet, Dark Elves and High Elves are going to be your two strongest races for Magicka DPS. Both races get 258 additional spell damage. Dark Elves get 1875 max Magicka, and they also get the exact same weapon damage and max stamina, so if you want to swap between Magicka and stamina DPS, Dark Elves fit that really good middle ground. High Elves, on the other hand, get 2000 max Magicka, and they get a little bit of stamina back whenever they deal damage. So you do get a little bit of additional stamina return to help out with any sort of dodge rolling, blocking, breaking free that you might need. But you are going to be limited to just playing Magicka DPS or healing as a High Elf. Other magically inclined races are also pretty good options. Bretons come to mind as one of the good alternatives. They get 2000 max Magicka, but instead of spell damage, they get a crap load of sustain. They get 100 base Magicka regen, plus they get 7% cost reduction on all Magicka-based abilities, I believe. So pretty good sustain for Bretons there if you're just looking for raw sustain, but your DPS ceiling is going to be on the lower side because you are giving up that spell damage from the Dark Elves and the High Elves. Those 3 races are going to be the best options there. There are obviously alternatives like Argonians that get max Magicka and Khajiits that get max Magicka and additional crit damage, but those DPS ceilings are going to be lower than those 3 other races. For attributes, all of our points are going into Magicka here. You typically will be using blue food, so you don't necessarily need to run any points into health. If you want to run some points into health, you can for additional survivability, but it's not absolutely necessary. For Mundus, still going with the Shadow, and we're running Ghastly Eyeball just for parse purposes, but like I mentioned earlier, you will typically be running blue food. Now for base game users, that is going to be this food here, so just any of the base game blue food, but the min-max food is going to be our Tame Pickled Fishbowl. This is going to be expensive just because it does use clam gall, so if you can't afford it, then you can just stick with normal blue food, but this does give you a little bit more stats compared to the blue here, so our Tame Pickled Fishbowl is going to be a min-max food of choice. If you need a sustain as well as the resources, you can run Clockwork Citrus Fillet or Witchmother's Potent Brew. Both of those foods do give you Magicka max health and some additional Magicka regen, but you are going to have a little bit lower max health and max Magicka compared to running blue food. So in that instance, yes, you might want to put some points into health to kind of offset the lower health from Witchmother's or Clockwork. Next, for our champion points, I might still be on. Yeah, I'm still stamina DPS setup here, so let me quickly arrange this. You're going to want full points into Arcanus, so 100 into Arcanus and 75 into Tenacity, and then from there you can put points wherever you'd like. So I have 31 Shadow Word, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord, but you can divide it up however you would like. Now for blue CPs, your main focus is going to be on here. So you're going to have 61 to Elfborn, 64 into Elemental Expert, 10 into Spell Erosion. From there, you have Mastered Arms and Thaumaturge. Thaumaturge is going to go up and down depending on class. For example, Mag Decays, you're going to want a little bit more to Thaumaturge because you have a lot more dots. But for Nightblades, for example, you're going to want lower Thaumaturge. So a good middle ground is going to be anywhere between 37 and 44. Nightblades might go as low as 31, for example. DKs can go as high as 61 to 66 potentially. It really depends on the class itself. Some classes might even push Thaumaturge up to 72 and put 3 points into Piercing in order to get the Exploiter passive as well. I'll be going over CPs for each individual class in those class-specific videos. But for this specific one, which is Nightblade, we're going to go 37 into Thaumaturge and then 66 into Mastered Arms, which gives us 32 Staff Expert. You can also drop it down to 31 and put that 1 point into Spell Erosion to kind of make up for some debuff uptime issues here. So this would be for a Magicka Nightblade, but again, depending on the class, you might be putting more points on the Thaumaturge, taking them out of Master at Arms and Staff Expert in order to make up for some more Thaumaturge damage. For our red CPs, this is going to be a balanced approach, so really good mitigation across all pieces of content, but not maximizing mitigation for a single piece of content. 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, 64 and a Hardy and Elemental Defender. And that pretty much covers it for this video. So again, build specific videos, so for those of you guys who are interested in skills and rotations, those are going to be down in the description below. The release of this video, they're not going to be out just yet, so they will be released throughout the duration of May and June, so just keep an eye on there. There should be dates on there for the specific release dates for each specific class. You'll also find a description of all the sets that I described in this video, where to find them, which equipment slots you can use them in, and why you would use them. You'll also find a generic CP distribution for you guys to use for any sort of Magicka DPS. And finally, when the ESOU website is up, you will find a written description of this guide and a link to that there. That concludes this video. Hope you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.